So I am honored to introduce our next featured speaker, Gyasi Ross, and I have introduced him, I've had the privilege of introducing him once before. Gyasi is from the Blackfeet Nation and resides on the Port Madison Indian Reservation near Seattle. He is an author and storyteller. News outlets regularly seek his input on politics, sports, pop culture, and the intersections thereof with Native life. Ross is the author of Don't Know Much About Indians, but I wrote a book about us anyways. And How to Say I Love You in Indian. He has a podcast named Breakdancing with Wolves and has released a spoken word hip-hop CD titled Isskootsik, Before Here Was Here, on Cabin Games Records. He has a powerful voice in conversations on race, social justice, and white privilege, as well as issues specifically affecting contemporary Native Americans. Please join me in welcoming Gyasi Ross.
Good afternoon. Is that Wisconsin nice? I read a lot about Wisconsin nice. We have this thing where I come from, Blackfeet Indian Reservation. When somebody greets you, you greet them back. Some people call it common courtesy, some people call it call and response. But we'll try it again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Could we please give a round of applause to Missy? Thank you for the gracious introduction. I also want to acknowledge Laura, Kyla, Winona, folks who are very, have been. You're lucky. You're lucky. Anytime a Native woman is willing to give you some togetherness, you should listen. And that's going to be some of what we're talking about today. I'm just going to introduce this. I read this study that said that white people are 74.9% more likely to listen thoroughly to a presentation if there's a PowerPoint with it. This is only my second time doing a PowerPoint. It's a true story. But I see the demographics of Madison. There's kind of a confluence there. So I'm hoping it helps. The title of this, If We, and by we, I mean you. And I'm not going to be Wisconsin nice. You means white people. Finally listen to Native storytellers. Humankind has a chance. It's very gloomy. Very gloomy. But you folks, everybody's seen the numbers, right? 2030. Everybody knows the significance of 2030, right? We also know that the hottest 20 summers, hottest 20 years in recorded history have all happened in the past 22 years. We also understand that 1 million species of wildlife is at grave threat to go extinct in the very near future if we don't change a trajectory. So when I say gloomy, some people might say pessimistic. I say that's the likely outcome at this point, unless we significantly change our behavior. Now, I want to submit that changing that behavior, as Missy alluded to, will largely be commensurate with doing what the hell Native people have been saying for a long time. And not just Native people of this nation, by the way, not Native people of this continent, but worldwide, Indigenous people have some best practices that folks, if we want to change, that's a big if. I don't want to assume anything. If we want to give more than lip service, because we're kind of in that generation of lip service. I want to give a story. I want to start off with a story, because that's what we're talking about, storytelling. Last week, I facilitated a conversation between tribal leaders of the state of Oregon and the state of Washington, because their treaty lands are not dependent upon the state boundaries, those arbitrary lines. Instead, they transcend the Oregon, Idaho, Washington borders. So we had tribal leaders from all over the place that were there to have a conversation with how you properly interface with Native nations. How do you do that properly? And I was the guy, they wanted me to mediate because apparently I have a loud voice and sometimes people will listen to me. So I said, yeah, cool, I'll do it. My friend Laura John, amazing Seneca and Blackfeet woman. Just for introduction, my name is Gyasi Ross. I'm a member of the Untitled Nation. Netanako Unagumsika, Nitomtu Amskapipukani. We're those tall, modest, and suspiciously good-looking people of the Northern Plains, directly south of what is now known as Canada, directly east of what is now known as Glacier National Park, one of the most beautiful places in the world. It's gorgeous. If anybody gets a chance to go to Glacier National Park, go there soon. Why? Anybody? That's right. We have a place that's called Many Glaciers. There's not so many glaciers anymore. That's its name on the map. You assume that it got its name as a result of, in fact, there being so many glaciers there. In the past 100 years, that unofficial count went down because, it's kind of inexact science to say when a glacier's gone. It's not a precise thing. There's some anecdotes, there's some best practices, but nobody knows quite for sure because most of the glacier, as we all know, is underground, underwater, right? And so, but in the past 100 years, there's thought to have been, according to the best estimates, gone from 125 glaciers down to less than 25 glaciers. That's a big change. That's a big change. So again, go soon. We also have this running joke on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation when you go up to Glacier National Park. If you ever happen to come upon a grizzly bear there, because there's a lot of grizzlies there, it's grizzly country, you show them your Indian ID card. Because grizzlies only eat white people. That's a true story. Like, you listen, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. But in fact, every news story that you see about grizzlies attack, and I think part of it is because just like you don't hear about Native Hawaiians getting eaten by sharks that often, we have a few, 10,000 years of familiarity with a particular species, and you learn, well, hey, that's not a pet, don't go pet it. They look cute, don't do that. You learn some practices that hopefully will assist in your survival. So, again, last week, Portland, tribal leaders, facilitating. How do you interface with these Native nations? And the day before we actually got to the nuts and bolts of negotiating between the city of Portland and these Native nations, they asked me to lead a conversation about consultation. Consultation, for you folks who do not know, is an official policy of the United States government that the United States government has to consider Native voices before it does any action that materially affects our communities. That doesn't just mean our reservations, because we all know this is all Indian land. But instead, whether it affects our waterways, whether it affects our Aboriginal territories, lands that we formerly were active in, where we had camps at, et cetera, et cetera. And so we had this consultation and it was great. I told them some stories about how, best practices, how you're supposed to actually consult with people. You give notice, you have opportunity to be heard. That's all standard procedural stuff, due process. And then you have also some better practices that are outside of the boundaries of the four squares of that law, which is, well, you actually just want to give them a lot of notice. Because just like anybody else, Native people generally hate having something that's forced down their throat at the 11th hour that you have to look at this now or else it's going to pass. That's called an ultimatum. That's not a consultation. And so we had this conversation. It was a good conversation. And of course, these folks, you know, they were somewhat enamored with the conversation. They were very, very participatory. They had a great time. And it was cool. But I had a feeling, just like I referred to a few seconds ago, that a lot of their participation, a lot of their interest was a result of me, and not necessarily to the process. See, because we're in that lip service, especially when it comes to things that might be perceived as political correctness. People think it's altruism, just check off the block box, and we're going to walk through the steps. We see that a lot. We see land acknowledgements, right? Yeah, everybody's familiar with land acknowledgements. We say, when we go to a place and we'll say, well, this is the ancestral homelands of such and such. And we want to give deference to that. Has anybody seen this? Raise your hands. It's that call and response thing again. If you see this, okay. Yeah, and it's a good practice. It's cool. It's cool. It makes sense that we would know in whose land we're traversing. That's a good thing. But I was also thinking about this. This is a little bit of form over substance. When I was turned 12 years old on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, we have a grocery store called IGA. We used to say it was called Indians Grab Anything because they had horrible produce, but they have a captive market, so of course we're going to buy that. I went down on my 12th birthday. I got a brand new Huffy freestyle bike. And $10. And so I promptly jumped on my Huffy freestyle bike, rode down. This is the same day I got the bike, my 12th birthday. Rode down to the grocery store, and didn't grab anything, IGA. And I'm gonna get a 6-pack of soda, because soda's a treat. And gonna get some orange Cragmont. Most of you folks don't know what Cragmont is, but it was like a localized brand. It was like Shasta, kind of generic. And I went down there, and I put my bike outside. I went to go get the soda, and I came back. My bike was gone. Same day I got it. And, time goes on. I cried, of course. I was mad, wanted to fight everybody, went looking every place. There was a hint that they might have my bike. I went looking for it. Never found it. And then later on, this guy who became my friend, his name was Clayton, he confessed. Hey man, I stole your bike. It was years later. I'm not mad anymore. We both have kids by this time. And I'm like, all right man, like you got me. And I'm not mad, but I still had a little feeling in my stomach. Like, you could have told me this earlier. Now, mind you, I'm not going to, as kids, I'm not going to go chase down his kids like, hey, man, your dad stole my bike. I'm going to whoop your ass. But if his son is riding my bike, that's a constant reminder that you stole something. And that's how I feel about land acknowledgements. All right, you're not the people who stole our land, but oftentimes you're the beneficiaries of that stolen land. And so just that being the kid that says, hey, my dad stole your bike, I'm not sure it's sufficient. Perhaps we should go a little further than just acknowledging the land. Instead say, you know what, how do we find some equity, perhaps, whether it's in an educational system, whether it's in an employment context, to make sure that you don't want this bike back anymore. You're a grown man. It's too small for you. But let's make sure that your kids somehow get some of that benefit that was intended for you. And so with land acknowledgements, I would like to challenge us to go a little bit further. Let's go a little bit further than just the window dressing of just lip service to say that we want to acknowledge whose land this is. And so in Portland, I got this feeling these folks are just trying to do the minimum. And there was an elder who was sitting in the front row. I'm not going to say her name. She's an amazing lady. She comes from the Yakima Nation. And there's about 5 minutes left in the session. And it's that point when people start getting antsy. People start looking at their phones and people start thinking about what they have to do next. And I called the elder up. I said, I would love you to talk to somebody who has 30 years of experience in consulting with governments from the Yakima Nation. And she could tell you a little bit about her experience. And she comes up. And boy, she could talk. She could talk. And she told some powerful stories about all the times that they had consulted with the federal government or the state government or municipal governments, and that consultation amounted to absolutely nothing. There was no substantive change in the behavior of those particular entities. All they did was listen, go through the motions. Now she's talking and she's about 15 minutes in. We were scheduled to end about 10 minutes ago, and you see these folks, they're these people who were just caught up in the rapture of eloquence and some cool sounding voices and stuff, and now they're like, man, I gotta go, they're moving. They're getting fidgety. And you see them trying to start looking at the exit, because you do that and you think that people get the hint. And this elder, she repeated herself several times. And I could tell they thought perhaps, well, doesn't she realize that she's repeating herself? We already heard this story. And I could see it. It was this sort of sympathetic white liberal eyes. Wisconsin nice. And then she got up and she walked over to her seat, and I asked for the mic before we dismissed, and I said, there's a reason why I wanted you to sit there and listen to this elder who was kind enough to share her wisdom with you. But unfortunately, you folks generally, I don't think, got the gist of what she was saying. See, there's a reason why we repeat our stories, because we come from an oral tradition. Because saying something once was not enough. You have to get this story right. Your survival depended upon it. This is our indigenous birthright. And you better make sure that that indigenous birthright is passed down appropriately to your successors, to the later generations. There was no Google to reference. And unfortunately, this is what happens so often when we say we're listening to native storytellers or native storytelling, is we're checking off that box. We're doing the land acknowledgement. We're doing it for nicety or political correctness. Altruism. Oh, I'm just listening to this nice old person. Without understanding, we're actually the person that's being enriched. And so with that, I would like to get past my first slide. This is called a pictograph. This is a scene from my grandpa. His name is Percy Bullchild, from his book. And he did Amskapipakani people the great honor and service of collecting all of these very, very important stories of how we came to be, who we are, how things came to be the way they are. How did that raccoon get that weird tail? Well, the book tells you. It's important stuff. And he gave this cool little thing that I didn't really realize at the time. He passed when I was 10 years old, before I got my Huffy bike stolen. And he gave this cool reasoning for the reason why he was writing this down. Because you got to figure the context. This was written in 1985. For those of you folks who do not know, practicing our religious beliefs for Native people was illegal within my lifetime until 1978. It took something called the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, IRFRA. That's the correct pronunciation. In order to say, no, Native people, you actually can go to your ceremonies. You actually can transmit information the way you've always transmitted. That's another reason for the oral nature of our stories, is because that transmission, this was illegal until just 7 years earlier. This is a cool passage. And all I think about is my grandpa being scary. My grandpa was a big, scary guy. But evidently within our communities, he was also somebody that was, I'm gonna read it to you so folks don't have to do too much work. Said, we Indians do not have written history like our white friends. Ours is handed down from generation to generation orally. In this way, we have preserved our Indian history and our legends of the beginning of life. All history, the native learns by heart and must pass it on to the little ones as they grow up. This was very true up to my time. It's these days that the younger generation, keep in mind this was written in 1985, of every nationality do not have ears for such things. These young people are just too busy being smarties. That was his word for smartass. I don't know if anybody else uses that. That's like a family colloquialism. Never know. Radical, militant, with no respect for their elders. They just do not want to listen to anyone except themselves. They think they are always right. From all of this, our oral history of us natives is dying away and being forgotten. We don't tell of things that we hear from others or recent happenings. These stories and others to follow were told to us from generation to generation as time went along. Even before the coming of the white people, we call them Napiquans. That's our Blackfeet word for white people, is Napiquans and Napiakis. Newcomers to Indian country did not teach us any of our history or how to tell a story. It's our indigenous birthright. We do it ourselves. Things of the past are always in our minds, us old people. Now this might sound like the lamentations of an old person, well, things just aren't the same as they used to be. But I submit that this is one of the reasons why we do not treasure those stories that have been transmitted down, is because we have gotten rid of this ability. This ability has long, as a matter of demonstrable empirical data, this ability has long been forsaken. And as evidence of that, I'm going to provide a little bit of evidence here on the PowerPoint, but I ask you all to just think about this. Pre-smartphones, how many phone numbers did you know? Yeah, all of them. Everyone that mattered, right? Everyone that mattered. No, I know grandmas. Now, 2019, almost 2020, how many do you know? So it's not simply the lamentations of an old Indian dude. And so I want to start with this proposition. The story that we're transmitting is a pedagogy on itself. It is the lesson. It's not simply a device, it's not simply an asset or a tool, but it is a lesson in itself. The way that those folks interfaced or did not interface with that native elder as she told that story, with which we are supposed to learn not only protocol, not only a certain hierarchy, no, I have to listen to this person, but number three, an incredibly, incredibly crucial tool, which is listening. Actually waiting till the end, understanding that if that person repeats themselves, there might just be a purpose behind it. So I collected this quote on the internet. That was a job title. I don't know where he's that job title at. And I want to present a little bit of evidence for my grandpa's proposition that how social media is hurting your memory. I use social media. I like social media. I was in a Twitter argument yesterday about weed. Because Joe Biden said something about like being a gateway drug, and it's just the gateway to Twinkies, right? Like, we know I don't smoke weed, but I know my friends, they can munch. And I know a lot of that is compounded by weed. I use social media. I'm not mad at social media, but for those of us who say that it doesn't have an effect on our memory, we're lying to ourselves. And there's actually a name for it. It's called the Google effect. Has anybody ever heard the Google effect? Raise your hands if you have. Okay. Do you know what the Google effect is? Oh, okay, you heard of it though. Okay, cool. So, the Google effect is this. If you have a piece of information, instead of remembering that important piece of information, as we used to do, okay, well, December 12th is my grandmother's birthday. Instead, what people do now is they learn the mechanism to find that piece of information. You find the pathways to that information. Oh, no, it's on my calendar. It's on my Facebook birthday reminders. It's on Instagram, that particular story. So I don't have to memorize that. I just have to memorize how to get to that information. Again, it's called the Google effect. Is technology making it more safe? There's a good sale on these shoes, by the way. This right here was an interesting headline to me. And can anybody see any possible issues with this? What was that? Yeah, new. Okay, so I like to scour articles about storytelling, and there's all these cool articles that are talking about storytelling nowadays. And they're talking about them in a very, very consumeristic, capitalistic frame. Well, no, this storytelling is a new asset for biocultural conservation. This comes from the University of Helsinki. And this is some way that maybe if we use this properly, we use this tool, this asset, remember we said it's not an asset, tool, or device, but maybe if we use this asset, tool, or device, possibly we could get in this transactional world a few people to believe this biocultural conservation research. Not giving deference to the story itself, but instead to it as a device. These are just interesting. Why every business needs powerful storytelling to grow. Again, that capitalistic, consumeristic frame that we can utilize this asset, this tool, the business of storytelling. Here's how storytelling can boost your career, company, and life. All this stuff's kind of ugly. I want to tell you about some stories that had more of a, I suppose, big, perhaps more societal impact as opposed to just your career and life. This was a story that actually comes from you folks' area. Has everybody been to the Menominee Forest? You have, good, beautiful. I suggest everybody go. So in the amazingly, amazingly wonderful dairy lands of northeast Wisconsin, beautiful, picturesque. And then you keep going northeast, if I'm correct, from Green Bay, and you see raising out of the flatlands this amazing, my friend Andrea described it as a wall. This wall that pops up. That's 234 acres of some of the most sustainable forest lands in the whole world. In fact, these forest lands have set the template, have set the conversation for how sustainable forestry should be executed throughout the world. Remember, the thesis is that if we finally start listening to native storytellers, then maybe we have a chance. And this is one of those stories that came from an old native dude who probably talked in circles, who was standing up in front of the city of Portland, or the city of Madison, or the city of Green Bay, and a whole bunch of people that knew a whole bunch better than he did were checking their cell phones, or whatever the 1855 equivalent of cell phones were. Yeah, abacus. And this guy got to this point. He said, start with the rising sun and work toward the setting sun. But take only the mature trees, the sick trees, and the trees that have fallen. When you reach the end of the reservation, turn and cut from the setting sun to the rising sun, and the trees will last forever. Now, you folks may not know this, but they've done 3 complete harvests of this entire forest and never skipped a beat, because they've done things according to a story that didn't originate with Chief Oshkosh, by the way. It was a story that he was told, in the same way that my grandpa said they transmitted information. And it was really important when he sat down and heard these stories that he listened. Because again, that's that best practice, to really, really listen, and to not hold judgment that perhaps I know better than this person, that perhaps this person is repeating themselves for a reason. I submit that this is one of those stories that is not a matter of debate at this point. It's not a matter of opinion. It's not a matter of conjecture. That has worked. This is one of those native storytellers that the rest of the world absolutely it would behoove them to listen to. There's others. One more quote from this particular story. This is kind of cool. I don't know this guy. I just found this online. But I've been there a few times, and I've kind of seen the same thing. I have no clue what it looked like 200 years ago, but I suspect that he's right. The forest today is what it was 200 years ago when the old ones looked at it. Sometimes I go to just sit there and look around, and I know that. That's a powerful thing. That's something I suspect, if we listen to this en masse, and take this story for what it actually is prophecy. If we take that prophecy and extrapolate it out and say we're going to replicate this practice from this native storyteller, I suspect that 2030 timeline might change a little bit. I suspect if we replicated that all over this continent as well as the southern part of Turtle Island, that all of a sudden we might see different outcomes for those 1 million species. Instead, we're doing the exact opposite. Burning forests down in South America, right? Nobody's listening to these stories. And there's a point with this, because obviously you folks are the ones who you don't want to burn forests down in South America. But I will say that I don't believe, just like those folks in Portland, just like those folks 150 years ago when Chief Oshkosh gave his warning, I don't think even the folks who are woke, folks who are about that life, that you truly, truly give these native stories the deference that they deserve. I think you see them as, okay, yeah, that's cool. In an ideal world, we can do that. But we can't do that right now because circumstances have changed. Well, they're doing it right now, just FYI. Another story, native storyteller from this area. There's a million stories, by the way. I just drew the easy ones from this area. They're here and they're practicing and they're doing it. There's execution there. Has anybody seen this book? Great book. What'd you think of it?
I went through it with my niece and we loved it.
Good. Good. That's great. Anybody else? Okay, what'd you think? What'd you think of the book?
Oh, I mean, it's like our story.
Yeah. I'm not an Anishinaabe, but I saw a lot of my grandpa's book in this. which was to reduce in a good way, in a very good way, in a necessary way, to people who might not necessarily, I grew up largely a city Indian. And so he reduced that language to something I could understand. I appreciated that. Reduced it to the point where non-native people, Napiakis, Napiguans, could also understand. And execute if you so wanted to. I suggest everybody who has an educational component to the organization that you're involved with, you should buy 100 copies of this book. You should absolutely buy 100 copies of this book, read it. I'm gonna read this whole passage to you. This is a story from this book. In the time of the seventh fire, new people will emerge. How much time do I have? Where's my timekeeper?
8 minutes until Q&A.
Okay, cool, beautiful. Thank you. We'll give a round of applause for the timekeeper. I thought I was a little bit more further behind, so we have time for a little bit more applause. Can we also give a round of applause for all the folks who helped organize this conference, please? Pay attention to this, please. In the time of the seventh fire, new people will emerge. They will retrace their steps to find what was left by the trail. It's okay if you close your eyes. I have a nice voice. You can. I don't mind. Their steps will take them to the elders who they will ask to guide them on their journey. But many of the elders will have fallen asleep. They will awaken to this new time with nothing to offer. Some of the elders will be silent because no one will ask anything of them. Oh, I think we just talked about that. The new people will have to be careful in how they approach the elders. The task of the new people will not be easy. If the new people will remain strong in their quest, the water drum of the Midday Wind Lodge will again sound its voice. There will be a rebirth of the Anishinaabe Nation and a rekindling of old flames. The sacred fire will again be lit. It is this time that the light-skinned race will be given a choice between two roads. If they choose the right road, then the seventh fire will light the eighth and final fire, an eternal fire of peace, love, brotherhood, and sisterhood. If the light-skinned race makes the wrong choice of the roads, then the destruction which they brought with them in coming to this country will come back at them and cause much suffering and death to all the earth's people. This is an old prophecy. This isn't revisionist history. I think at a particular time, let's rewind to, let's say, 1855, when Chief Oshkosh made his statement about the Menominee Forest. That might have sounded like doomsday prophecy. Oh, that would never come to be. You're crazy. This is apocalyptic talk. This is Book of Eli. This is I am legend. This will never happen. I think we can actually look at this story and see that it lines up pretty well with what's happening. Again, this isn't conjecture. We're talking about 10 years from now, 2030. We're talking about science. We're talking about empirical data. And I don't know if it would have changed anything, but I'd like to think about when the first non-natives, first Napiakis and Napiguans learned this story in this area. And I'm sure that's cute. It's a cute story. But it can't really happen. And he repeated this a couple of times. But the truth is that these prophecies, the reason why they were repeated, and the reason why every one of you folks should have a copy of this book, is because this was prescribed. This is exactly the route with very, very tangible landmarks that we can check off and say, yeah, we're on this road right now. And unless we listen to those native storytellers, not even looking nationwide or all across Turtle Island to South America. But instead, right in this area, this native brilliance, this native genius that has been telling you folks stories for a long time. And I know you folks are the woke ones that say, yeah, we absolutely need to listen to this. But again, I suggest we need to go further than just listening in 2020. That time is getting short. Humankind, will have a chance. But the only way humankind will have a chance is if we actually give that deference, give that time. How do we execute this thing that is not just a cute story, but instead holds our very survival in the hands? How do we go past just having a conference? How do we go past simply just meeting and being polite to each other? We got to get past being polite strangers. We got to have uncomfortable conversations. We got to have real meaningful conversations. There's this whole exercise of Native people coming to these sort of conferences, with all due respect, is an exercise in, it shows the redemptive story arc that Native people inherently believe in. Because every single Native person who has been asked, what do we do, has been asked that question 50 times before. Bless you. It's similar to, it's politics season, election year next year, and I see the way the Democratic Party is scurrying not to lose to Trump again, because it's likely that will happen. And every 4 years or so, the Democratic Party goes to black women and says, how do you clean up our mess? Happens every single time. The answer is, you start now. You start now. This is a quote. I love this quote. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. I don't want to be in the 11th hour, 2028. Shit. We're in trouble. Man, we didn't do any of that stuff that this guy said, but he wasn't actually saying any of this. I'm stealing other people's quotes that they said, but they actually didn't say that stuff either. They got it from somebody else because, again, that's how natives transmit information. And all of these stories were learned because survival was on the line. That's the reason why we bothered to learn them. It wasn't simply because they were fun stories. But it was instead this seventh fire prophecy has been transmitted down for hundreds and hundreds of years, because at some point they're going to be at 2019, almost 2020, and they're going to need to know that. So hopefully they do something so that in 2028 things will be a little bit different. They probably won't. They probably won't. But just given the chance, we're going to give them that opportunity. We're going to be gracious with our information and provide them with just another opportunity to do right. That's that redemptive story of Native people just constantly believing, for whatever reason, I don't know why sometimes, I do the same damn thing. I'm sitting there with Portland city officials. Look, okay, when they made this treaty 150 years ago, those folks sat here just like you are now, with smiles on your faces, acting like you want to listen to the Native people. And guess what? You didn't do it then. There's no reason that I will believe you'll do it now, but maybe. That's the redemptive arc. And we have to believe that. We have to believe that. Otherwise, these folks, these women who are here and have been gracious enough to provide these opportunities for instruction, wouldn't keep on doing it. Thank you. I see, it shouldn't have a smiley face. She has a smiley face on the 1 minute notifier. It's really not a smiley face. Yeah, you better. So in closing, before we get to question and answer, and there will be question and answer, and please feel free to challenge, question, provoke, whatever. I'm here for it. But In closing, there's a few best practices. And I want to refer back to the elder that spoke, the Yakima, from the Yakima Nation. Number one is listen, 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 listen fully. Native people tend not to speak in cliff notes, and we shouldn't have to. Our stories, if you actually pay attention to them, they're liberating. They're powerful. They're saving. There's salvation latent within there. But you have to listen. Number two is at that point of digestion and really sitting with these truths, it's really, really crucial that we take it past simply lip service. Simply saying, well, we checked off that Indian box, or we checked off that black box, or we checked off that women box, or we checked off that Muslim box. No, we actually need to sit with these truths and have those uncomfortable conversations and consider the veracity and the brilliance that these particular communities and identities bring to our conversation. And then finally, we have to act. Time is really, really running low. And I'm sorry I didn't give something that was really, really fun and happy and Native American Heritage Month, where we talk about eagle feathers and a bunch of other cool stuff that is absolutely important parts of our culture and beautiful parts. But we've been ringing the alarm for a long time, in addition to the beauty. And folks tend to focus on the beauty. So I'm gonna be the ugly part. I'm gonna be the ugly part. The time is nigh, it's past nigh. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. We actually gotta get to the point of really getting into deep consultation, action with the Native nations that are here within this state now called Wisconsin, but for so long was simply known as theirs. With that, I wanna open up to question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you for that, sir. The PowerPoint did help me. Thank you. You touched on it a couple times, and I want to give the opportunity to publicly listen to you if you have an opinion. I think you probably think about the U.S. federal government as much as I do. Do you have an endorsement for the presidential race, or maybe some guiding principles for other people that you would share?
No, thank you. That's an important question. I personally, weird identity stuff aside, I personally really, really like Elizabeth Warren. I think she has great ideals. She also recently, so my day job is as a lawyer. And I work with a nation called the Menominee Nation. And they have a treaty right to hunt whale. And they've done this for tens of thousands of years in a sustainable way. And they're fighting for that right now in federal court. In fact, right now there's a administrative law judge hearing that's going on in Seattle. And she was the only one, and I know this for a fact, that you folks might have seen it, there was a New York Times story last week on the Menominee Nation. And it's a beautiful story, beautiful photos. My cousin, who is a council member for the Menominee Nation, he was mad because they had him taking photos for like 3 hours, and then not one got in the New York Times. The author, his name is John Elligon, and he gave a questionnaire to every single Democratic candidate, and she was the only one that responded and said, yes, we need to honor, people are focusing on this one treaty right. The fact is we need to honor all treaty rights, irrespective of whether it's popular or not. I think she has wonderful ideas about the environment. I think that, by the way, I'm not a Democrat, I'm an independent, but I think Democrats are in trouble in 2020. And again, they'll be going to black women and say, hey, how do we fix this shit? And it'll be too late. But I think that she, to me, is the most captivating and most substantive candidate. But unfortunately, she's languishing in Iowa right now, and it just shows you that, I mean, to me personally, it shows you that the priorities are elsewhere within the Democratic Party.
Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate it. I keep hearing the word "listen" come up in this conference today, and so if you had to make a suggestion for 2 or 3 things that you tell people, just tips, best practices to be a better listener when an Indigenous person is telling the story, what would you say to folks that are here today?
I think that it's really important, number one, to get to our homelands. If you notice, all these opportunities to listen to Native people, they usually happen in historically white institutions. And that changes the conversation. There's structural power dynamics involved there. And so I think if this conversation, if we wanted to bring it to a different level, and I believe that we do, I truly believe that, then I think it's incumbent upon you folks and to compel everybody, but everybody who wants to be involved with this conversation, to go to those Native nations, to meet with their leadership and their department heads, and see how you can learn from them within that environment. I don't know why every single person here, I mean this honestly, not tongue-in-cheek at all, I don't know why every single person here hasn't gone to the Menominee Forest to see how they've created such a sustainable model. That's something, you got genius right there, I can learn from that. But I haven't even been there. And so I think it's important to get to our homelands, to see how mining in the northern part of the state has wrecked certain parts of our communities, and the effect that the reliance upon extraction industries has, it's had a particular toll. We talk about environmental justice, had a particular toll within our communities. We have to know these stories. One of the things that I'm very fortunate, but I don't, it's not, it's not because of ease. I'm here for a reason in Madison, Wisconsin. I have 3 children at home. But I know that these stories that I'm fortunate enough to collect here are worth coming here. And that's the only reason why I can speak with any level of conviction about these stories, is because I take the time to go learn those stories. As an attorney, I'm involved with criminal justice, criminal law. I have to learn my client's story up and down. I have to know everything about it. That requires me, so this ain't 2 or 3 things, but this is something where you have to learn holistically where this person's coming from, with no judgment, with no assumption that you're smarter than anybody else there, but instead to just listen and suspend disbelief. Just a quick story. There was this guy. He was writing his dissertation, doctoral thesis on native cosmology. This is in Canada. And I have a friend, his name is Leon Rattler. He's an elder within our tribe. He's brilliant, brilliant. He's one of our knowledge keepers. And I happen to be able to call him friend. I'm lucky. And this guy was, can you tell me about what happened in that sweat lodge? And he's like, well, I was there and a buffalo came there. And the guy said, you mean the spirit of the buffalo came there? It's like, no, goddamn buffalo came See, these Western concepts, they keep us limited in our potential worldview. The idea of magic is so far gone for a lot of people because we're in this empirical world. Empiricism is another form of religion. Right? It's something that we still have to believe. We still have to believe that, I've never seen an atom, have you? But we believe in them. We know that they're there. And so we have a belief in magic. We have a belief that our stories, these stories have power. Oftentimes we're vindicated by Western science after the fact. But by the time it's vindicated, it's too late. We can't change that outcome. So we have to go in, I believe truly, with the spirit of complete humility, and not fake humility, but man, I don't know, it could be right. Could be right. And I think that that's the key to having these, not just with Native people, but cross-cultural communications, that other people have a reality that we couldn't potentially, possibly begin to understand unless we immerse ourselves in it.
I wanted to ask a question that decenters the whiteness and white unknowing in this space, which is, can you speak to what beauty have you seen emerge when Native people and people of color build coalitions together, and what has that meant for the work that you hope will save us from the 2030 doom?
Yeah. There's a story, and it happened just a few years ago, 2016. And it was a story about these people who wanted to, it was a company called Energy Transfer Partners that wanted to put a pipeline through a white part of North Dakota, which is like very much like saying a white part of Wisconsin. That's redundant. And people said, nah, that's not cool, so we're going to put it running instead through a native part of North Dakota called the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. And that story was started by a few women, Native women, Phyllis Young, LaDonna Allard, and then it was transferred, that story was transferred to some young Native people who said, we want to broadcast this story to everybody. Because we don't believe this old story that Native people are less valuable than other people. We don't believe that our water sources are less valuable. So we're gonna challenge that story. And the way we're gonna challenge that story, initially, man, we need to get some attention for this, so we're gonna physically run from North Dakota to Washington, D.C. And hopefully people will pick up the story. Nobody picked up the story. But these young Native storytellers were not done with the story then. They said, okay, well that form of storytelling did not work. I have to do something else. So they started trying to, they went to Hillary Rodham Clinton, her campaign headquarters in New York. They erected a teepee there. And they knew that CNN or somebody was gonna ask, like, why is this there? And they're gonna tell the story. Nobody asked. So they, well, you know what? I'm not daunted by this. I'm a storyteller. It's my job to acclimate to the temperature of everybody else. If this form of storytelling isn't working, I gotta tell everybody a different form of storytelling. So they started connecting with all of these, what's called influencers in social media, Vic Mensa, Rosario Dawson, Dave Matthews, Shailene Woodley. And eventually the story started getting out. And in fact, that story became the second most, as a matter of data, the second most viewed story of 2016, second only to the presidential election. You're not going to beat the presidential election. That story led to literally every single Native nation in the United States, at least at some point, being present at Standing Rock Sioux tribe in an act of solidarity, that we stand with each other. And then a lot of people would look at that story and say, well, but there's oil flowing through that Dakota Access Pipeline to this day, so that story, they lost that story. But I think that's a really, really short-sighted view of that. To me, that story won. This notion that you can oppose fossil fuels at the point of distribution, not at the point of consumption, which has always been the model. Native people thought of this brilliant idea. Well, no, let's get it at the point of distribution. First time we ever did that. That's spreading. That's how stories go. When you tell a good story, somebody else wants to tell that story. And so to me, that was a great example in modern times of how these stories, just based upon Native brilliance, based solely on Native jet propulsion, compulsion, a willingness to do what they have to do outside of resistance, whatever the resistance is. We have to do this for us because this is our communities, and a threat to this one of our communities is a threat to all of our communities. And so to me, that was a powerful example. Just in recent times, there's others, but that was one you folks might have heard about.
Do we have time for another question?
I don't think we do, sorry.
Okay. Thank you folks very much.